somebody who's out there and really paying attention to the stuff that's going on, who's putting a magnifying glass to the decisions that management is making, not just waiting for things to come to them.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We are here with Joe DeManuelle-Hall from Labor Notes. Staff writer, is that your position, staff writer?
Yeah, staff writer, organizer, more on the organizer side these days.
Gotcha. Okay, well, great. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And so in overtime, for folks that maybe I'm not sure how much you know, Joe, about the show, but we have a radio half where we're on multiple radio stations. We're on a conservative radio station, we're on a black radio station, and we're on a community radio station. The first two in North Alabama, the third in New Orleans. And so this is more of a general audience. We just kind of catch people as they come. And so we kind of try to keep it higher level. We talk about the news more, and higher level Unions 101 type stuff, right? But now our online audience, we're not on the radio right now. We're not going to be on the radio right now. And so this audience is much more heavily union members, union activists, left-wingers, union supporters type folks. And we've got examples in the chat right now. We've got let's see, Jose is a backup shop steward at UPS Anaheim. Jeb was a union rep for several years at the Ironworkers, Local 477. Pam Demonia, I'm an electrician, presumably in the union. William Pina is another UPS Teamster union member. Think he's a shop steward. Jared Leggett is on the organizing committee for his union. All these, and of course the people that don't comment. So this is so we're kind of, I'm not sure how colleges decide what to number their courses, but we are now in kind of Unions 102 or 201 type territory. And I wanted to spend a good amount of time on stewards, because stewards are like probably the most important union office, or one of the most important union offices, union positions that you can have. And whether it's called a steward or not, some people, my union calls them assistant vice presidents, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it is what it is. I'm an assistant vice president of my union, and that basically makes me a steward. So first, let's start with a 101 level definition of steward. What is a union steward, Joe?
Sure, thank you. So a union steward, most basically, is the shop floor level representative of a union. And that can be called, like you said, in different unions, a lot of different things. Some unions call them delegates, some call them stewards, some call them assistant vice presidents, right? But the idea is that these are working representatives of the union. Stewards may get some amount, small or large, of time away from the job to do the job of stewarding. But unlike many union presidents, maybe other union officers, business agents, or union reps, whatever you call them, these people are people who spend the majority of their time doing the job. They're at work. This is mostly a volunteer role. Though, like I said, there can be some small perks or times away from the job that you get. But the idea is that these are the people who are day-to-day, shoulder to shoulder with their coworkers, seeing what's happening at work, talking with people. And for a lot of union members in the US, these are the face of the union, right? These are people who union members see every day, whereas you might only see a union officer every once in a while or never, right? Depending on your union. And these are people who are also responsible for the day-to-day enforcement of contracts in unionized workplaces too. They're the ones who are watching out for contract violations. They're the ones who are, in many cases, dealing with the low-level management or the early stages of a grievance procedure, depending on your union, maybe a lot further than the lower level of a grievance procedure, but doing things like investigating issues, going at management with problems, informing their coworkers about stuff that's going on.
Gotcha. And so then how does one become a union steward?
That really depends on your union. Unions handle it really differently. Some unions appoint their shop stewards. So you know, a local officer, a rep, a business agent, what have you, recognizes you and says, okay, that's you now. Some unions hold elections for stewards and even for backup stewards, right? UPS, like was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of positions for alternate stewards, particularly in big workplaces, right? So that it really depends, but generally, if you're a workplace activist and you're interested in getting more involved in the union, showing up and being known to your coworkers as somebody who is knowledgeable about what goes on, who is interested in people's issues and is interested in trying to figure out people's issues is the best step, regardless of the actual structure, the constitutional structure, bylaw structure of how a steward is selected.
Yeah.
Jacob,
ahead,
I was
Adam.
going to jump in there on that because that's been my experience in the education realm is, you know, whatever the Constitution and bylaws may say about elections, the reality is that it was whoever was willing to do it, which means very low barriers to entry if you're interested in getting involved. The flip side to it is that sometimes people became, you know, building reps, as they were called in education, by virtue of being willing to hand out a newsletter every now and then, or, you know, something very low level. And they weren't really there to serve in that capacity to address worker issues and be an advocate for workers. But yeah, I would say probably a lot of folks, if you're listening, chances are the barriers to entry are pretty low because there's always a need for more people involved and willing to take on a new role. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage anyone who's listening to find out how do you officially become one in your union. But on a practical level, it may be as simple as find out where to show up or who to tell that you're interested.
Right. Yeah, that is because since steward is the lowest level office, that's going to be the one that is most often undone. They're most often have open positions, and that was all it took. My local appoints stewards, and so basically all assistant vice presidents. Basically all it took is that I showed up to meetings and I expressed an interest in participating in the union. And then they were like, oh, well, you want me to go ahead and appoint you? And I was like, well, I'm still in my probationary period. Maybe we can wait a little bit. But so don't want to put a target on my back while they can get rid of me for literally any reason. But I could have been a steward and assistant vice president as soon as like 3 months into working there. And it's very easy to become a steward.
That's actually a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Jacob, because it's not to say that you can't be a steward or a rep, you know, when you're still very early in a position, in a probationary period or non-tenured period. You know, certainly you can do that if it's something you're willing to do. But it may be wise to not have all of your stewards be non-tenured or probationary. Just something to consider. I was a rep or steward as a non-tenured teacher and was happy to do that. But I worked with folks who were more seasoned. And so depending on the situation, we could kind of tag in, tag out, you know, depending on where our strengths were.
Right. And so what do you think, Joe, is and you basically run you basically run the Stewards program for labor notes, right? Can you talk to us about that before we go into more about some tips and tricks to being a good steward?
Yeah, sure. So I certainly can't claim to have started it. You know, the one big resource that Labor Notes has had for the entirety, or a big portion of the entirety of its now 43-year existence, is nuts and bolts resources for union activists. Because in many unions, you don't get much support, if any at all, right? Some unions just say, great, you're a steward now. Maybe here's a button if you're lucky. maybe there's steward training, maybe there's not, right? But in order to be an effective union activist, there's some amount of knowledge that you need to know. So something that we've done for a long time is put out articles that we call Stewards Corners, that are monthly articles in our monthly magazine about both nuts and bolts and more organizing focused kind of resources for stewards, things to help people thinking about that. So those are still there. That's something that we do. We also now put out a series of books by a really great labor attorney named Bob Schwartz, including books like The Legal Rights of Union Stewards, books like that, that are available through Labor Notes, and that have for a long time been just like really the Bibles of stewards' rights. The one that I mentioned, The Legal Rights of Union Stewards, is just like, there's nowhere else that you can find a book like that, really. I think that's as effective as that. More recently, in the last, say, year or so, we've been doing monthly online stewards workshops that are balancing, again, between those kind of nuts and bolts things and the more organizing kind of side, trying to mix them up a little bit. The idea being that really there are very few opportunities for stewards to interact with other stewards in different unions. If you're a steward in the Teamsters, there's not a lot of opportunity structurally within your union work to talk to a building rep, right, from the local teachers union, even in your same city, right? But we believe that there's a lot for these folks to learn from one another. So every month we get together, dozens, sometimes over 100 stewards to learn, talk, discuss about a topic, share their experiences. And for me, it's one of my favorite things that I get to do.
It is very, I've been to a few of those events. I love it. I like it a lot. I will say that Robert Schwartz should make a book about the legal rights of union stewards in the public sector, because that book is not very helpful to me. So it's all related to private sector stuff, and I keep looking for public sector stuff, but it's nothing. So y'all are really letting me down. But I suppose some people could get some good out of it.
There are at least as many public sectors as there are states, though. It's part of the problem, right? And plus the federal government, which makes it another challenge.
Yeah, definitely.
But I just want to promote those online trainings that Labor Notes is doing. Great stuff. Anyone listening, if you need more, if you need actual like Q&A, if whatever kind of training you need, there's a good chance maybe your local or your union isn't providing it for you, but Labor Notes is out here kind of filling the gap. And so if you're not subscribed to Labor Notes, if you're not getting their emails in your inbox, that's like the easy thing I can ask you to do today for Labor Day weekend is subscribe to Labor Notes, so that you can not only get their fantastic articles, but you're, in the loop for these training opportunities, which are usually free or very low cost. And on that note, notice we have not plugged it today. We need to plug that Labor Notes is coming to Alabama, October 15th, the Alabama Troublemakers School. We haven't mentioned that yet, but we're going to keep plugging that over the next month and a half. Hope to see some of our listeners there.
Yeah. So, Joe, what do you think are some of the key general things that make a good union steward?
It's a tough one. I think there are three main categories that I think about, and they're not always in equal balance, but those are being a watchdog. So somebody who's out there and really paying attention to the stuff that's going on, who's putting a magnifying glass to the decisions that management is making, who's keeping an ear to the ground about what people are talking to, both what people are actively bringing to a steward, but also like really going out there, asking people questions, hunting down issues, not just waiting for things to come to them. I think an effective steward is also an enforcer. So we were talking earlier in the conversation about the things that we want to get into a union contract, right? One thing that I used to tell the stewards that I worked with, because before I worked at Labor Notes, I was a rep, was that a contract that isn't enforced is just a piece of paper. And it's great to have that stuff in there, but there are contracts all across the United States that have great language in them that have never once been enforced, or that fall by the wayside all the time, right? And for all sorts of reasons. But one of the roles of a steward is to actually try and make those things happen and to try and expand them. That use it through the usage of grievance procedures that are in the contracts, through the usage of legal rights that they have, through organizing, to make sure that these things are not only in place, but that they grow and expand, and that we win the most maximal version of those things that are in a contract and beyond, right? As well as the things that aren't in the contract. And the last piece of it, or one of the last pieces of it, I think, is the steward is also an organizer. The steward, it's very easy, and it's often presented that the steward is like a workplace lawyer, right? And that's, I mean, that is a job enough in itself, right? A steward could keep themselves busy just by smacking down grievances every time an issue happens, at least with workplaces that I've been in or worked with as a rep. But that to build a strong union, you need to get more members involved. And the people who are best situated to do that are people who are organizing in the workplace themselves, the stewards. And that, you know, a president can't alone organize, even the president of a small local can't effectively organize all of the members of a local, right? And that a strong network of stewards who are actually going out and trying to get people involved is one of the best things that can happen to make a stronger union.
And one of the ways that Labor Notes has suggested that stewards take on that organizing position is through grievances. And there's a way there is a way to do grievances in that workplace lawyer type way that is very procedural, that doesn't involve a lot of people. And then there's a way that doesn't do that, that involves lots of people, that galvanizes people around a grievance, to make it more of a collective win, as opposed to one worker being really smart and having good words that they can say and that they can write, right? So and I got that from one of your Stewards Corner articles. Not sure who wrote it, but Labor Notes does Stewards Corner articles that are basically like tips and tricks about how to be a steward, and this one was organizing around a grievance or something like that. Can you talk to us about that article?
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, one of the complicating parts of this can be that not every grievance is going to be an issue that you're necessarily going to organize around, right? That I'm really careful when I'm talking with people about it to not throw out this like technical or grievance, more legalistic, you know, or like contract legalistic oriented piece of this. This is like a really important part of the job, right? There are going to be issues where one member comes to you with something, and the way to handle it is you're going to work with that one member, and you're going to file a grievance, and you're going to investigate the hell out of it, and you're going to make a really good argument, and you're going to go through the process, right? I think part of what we're trying to talk with people about is that there are some issues that will come before a steward, before a rep, that will be opportunities to do more. And that almost all of these are an opportunity to do some amount more. And it's just a matter of how much, right? And so organizing around grievances, organizing in general, the idea for a steward is use every opportunity that you have to try and get more people involved in the work of the union. And that can be involving more coworkers in the investigation of a grievance, right? If somebody comes to you with a problem saying, hey, can you help me talk with some of your coworkers to see if anybody else has this problem too? It can be, you know, circulating a petition, can be getting people involved in marching on the boss around an issue. The idea really is, and I'm going to steal something here from an Amazon worker that I spoke with who was organizing in his workplace, said that his role was to collectivize everything. And I think that's kind of the idea, right? Is to take every opportunity to get more people involved in this and to not make it about this one person who's making a really good argument for something. So organizing around grievances looks different depending on the issue. But the idea is you want to find issues that can get a bunch of people involved. In Labor Notes, we use the phrase widely felt and deeply felt to think about issues that you want to take on, right? There are issues that a bunch of people care about and that people care about deeply enough to actually do something about, because those things aren't necessarily the same. Generally, often advise that people take on issues that are winnable too. Sometimes you can take on a losing fight, right? But if you're trying to build a winning team, people only want to take on the losing fight so many times. We want to have the hope of winning. And so trying to go out and find those issues and treating every issue that comes to you as an opportunity to say, hey, is this one of those things? And many of them won't be, right? But it could be something as simple as organizing around a grievance, could be something as simple as, say, you find an issue that impacts more than one person in your workplace, as work rule issues often will, right? Instead of filing an individual grievance, you file a group grievance, right? And instead of just doing one of those class action grievances that says everybody in this title, you go around and you get everybody to sign the grievance who's affected by it, right? And you use the grievance as a petition. I read a great example. I'm going to self-reference here, Stewards Corner in Labor Notes, where one of the suggestions for doing that was on the back of the grievance form having, rather than a series of lines for people to sign, something like the spokes of a wheel, which each spoke was a line for somebody to sign their name onto. And so it does this thing where it kind of equalizes the playing field, and it also lessens the fear aspect of somebody having their name be the first on a list of names, right? Which is something that you can often experience in getting people to sign a petition. But turning in a grievance like that, right? Organizing around a grievance, getting people involved in the process, and treating it as an educational opportunity with members around you to say, here, this is a violation of the contract. Did you know that the way that the management has been treating you is a violation of the contract? We have a contract. This is what we do about it, right? Because you would be surprised how many people in a unionized workplace don't know anything about the processes, right? They might have some faint idea, but being able to teach more people about this also ultimately helps the steward's work down the line, right? The more people you have out there keeping an eye out for contract violations, for wondering even if something that they experience is a contract violation, makes for a stronger union.
What would you say, what can stewards do to build up a union that is almost totally inactive? You know, there are unions across the country that are almost in name only, right? And so if there are people that are listening that, you know, and in unions like that, if there's not some like weird corruption going on, it's especially easy to just jump in and go to a meeting and say, and jump right in and do stuff. How does somebody take that opportunity to become a steward and create a union where theoretically you've got one, you've got a contract, you've won an election years ago, presumably, but nobody is, either everybody or is paper members, or the density is just crazy low. And there may be even people that are working there that don't even know there's a union there. How can you as a steward build up a sort of consciousness around the union and around the rights that you've got? What are some of the first steps that you would start taking there?
I think you got to start small. And starting small is having conversations with your coworkers about what's going on, introducing yourself to the people who you don't know and talking with the people who do, and ask people questions about what's going on at work. You know, there's I think a tendency among really energetic union activists to move fast, and to assume that we know what the issues are that are going to mobilize people, right? You look at a situation and you say, well, that's obviously a problem. Let's go and fix that. But I think that there's often a real benefit in taking a pause to say, I got to figure out what people care about, and we got to let people tell us what they care about, and ask them to be involved, right? It can be something as simple as you have a conversation with somebody in a break room they bring something up and say, hey, can we talk about this for a few minutes after work so I can understand the problem a little bit more? And all along the way, doing some education around, some flags in your head say, that's a contract violation. Did you know that we have a contract? Let's take it out and look at it together. That what's happening right now is a violation of the contract. We could think about doing something about it. Let's talk. And so it's really, in that situation, you're talking about reorganizing the workplace and really starting from scratch, right? You're trying to assess your coworkers. You're trying to identify what the issues are. You may already have a union, but unfortunately, in our country, a lot of workplaces that are union are functionally unorganized. And the job of the steward is to reorganize them or further organize them, right? Make them stronger. And so it's almost going back to the beginning of the steps that we were hearing about earlier in this call, where people are talking about putting together an organizing committee, right? You want to go around and put together a crew of people who can work with you to go and reach more people, talk more people, identify what some of the issues are, start holding small, maybe informal union meetings during lunch breaks or after work, right? To get people to talk with one another about what the issues are and to not feel alone in those issues. Part of the responsibility of the steward is to present to people an alternative or a path out of the problems that they're facing. There are issues in every single workplace, and you want to present that, look, the union can be a vehicle for this if we make it one, but I need your help to do that.
Absolutely. Adam, did you have anything that you wanted to ask him?
Well, I was just going to give a couple real examples from my experience to sort of pull out what Joe's been describing with the, deeply felt, widely felt sort of issues that can manifest in grievances. I'm thinking of one example where I had a worker who was misclassified in her pay, and she did a very unique job in the school system. It was just I don't even think it was necessarily intentional to begin with. It was one of those just weird things that happens. And unfortunately for her, it meant that she was being paid thousands of dollars less than she really should have. Now that's a unique problem, right? And so not many people could relate to that particular issue in the grievance. But where it did translate is that the only reason she was coming to me was because she'd been trying for over a year to resolve it herself through the proper channels, quote unquote, right? This was not a worker who wanted to go file a grievance. She was very hesitant to file a grievance, but she had been, she had pages of emails back and forth with payroll, with human resources, with her supervisor, with her supervisor's supervisor. That was an issue, though, that did resonate with members, right? Because even though you may have never had an issue with your pay scale, you probably have had issues with poor communication with the central office, or you probably have had problems where you tried to resolve it without even resorting to a grievance, but you were stonewalled and you never had the opportunity to get it fixed right away. And so that was something that, I was able to talk to members about. And, I'm proud that we won that grievance, and she received a pretty hefty pay raise and some back pay. And the thing that I asked her was like, okay, well, to the extent that you're comfortable talking about this, you should tell people, like, hey, I just won a major grievance. Like, here's what we did. Here's why that's a cool thing. And it actually helped bring several other people out of the woodwork who had similar pay misclassification issues. So it did help with some organizing, and it did translate into some broader issues. And also, another example that comes to mind is when I had some issues with the librarians. And, there's a librarian in every school. All of them were experiencing certain issues, but naturally there was only, maybe 2 or 3 that were really vocal about it. But I was successful in getting those 2 or 3 vocal ones to get other people on board, so that by the time we actually made it to the grievance step, it wasn't, just the two people who were, the complainers, so to speak, who were filing a grievance. It was about a dozen people filing the grievance. And let me tell you, central office took that a lot more seriously than just, the one or two. Because they were pretty shocked that there were that many people willing to sign their name to the grievance. And just frankly, it was more physically impressive when I printed it all out. And sometimes those little tricks do make a difference. Like when I could put a big stack of papers there and say, hey, here's 12 grievances, and lay them all out there for human resources or whoever's on the other side of the table. So I would say that if you're ever in a situation where there's a grievance that needs to be filed, always do look and see, like that Amazon worker was telling Joe, like, is there a way to collectivize this? Am I really the only person with this grievance? Or are there other people who are impacted as well? And even when there's not, even if it is that, individual case where you do kind of have to do the lawyeristic approach, there's probably some kind of theme there, whether it's, lack of response and communication from management to resolve an issue, or, whatever the theme is that you can tease out that you can then go back and share with other members. But, so those were a couple of practical examples that I had in my experience. And, otherwise just want to echo everything Joe said there. And I think y'all are right on with this issue that we have unions in workplaces, but that doesn't mean every workplace is organized necessarily. Not every union workplace is particularly organized, which presents both challenges and opportunities. Right. So I think that's why it's important that folks get involved. If they already have a union in their workplace, okay, well, you already are like ahead of the game. So the opportunity there is to get involved, read your Stewards Corner from Labor Notes, take these trainings so that you can be effective and get in there. And, next thing you know, you could really be shaking things up at your workplace, and you could, be the next leader of your union.
Can I add a couple things that what Adam said? Anything? So one, for sure, talking about the individual grievances and the wins, right? The way that the grievance structures from many unions are often set up, it's happening behind closed doors. And even if you do win, other members might not know about it. And there are going to be cases where you're not going to be able to bring those around, right? Where you're going to win something, you're not going to be able to put it in a newsletter, go around, do meetings and stuff. But take every opportunity that you can to do that kind of thing. I remember that in my previous world, we won a disciplinary arbitration for a guy who got fired over some BS, right? And, it was complicated, but it was a win, right? And so with this guy's permission, we went around and we took him around to have break room meetings at every one of the work locations to say, look, this is what happened. He won. Hear it from him, right? He went through this. He lost his job and he got it back. And that was, a victory, right? That was an opportunity for people to hear about that, and taking every chance that you can to do that. Obviously with members' permission, but if you can, these are folks who have a good reason to talk a good game about the union and about what the union can do, right? Because something just happened for them.
Right.
And I think second, talking about this, like how can we use grievances more creatively? That Adam's talking about this like stack of grievances thing. And imagine how much more effective a grievance hearing is when you have 5, 10, 15 people on your side of the table than when it's just you and an affected member and an HR manager and a low-level supervisor sitting across the table, right? One thing that we used to do sometimes was, in my last job, was that when there was an issue that people were feeling really fired up about, rather than, a lot of the time we would file grievances by email or by, one person would hand them to a manager or leave them in a manager's mailbox or whatever. We would use them as an opportunity for a march on the boss, right? We would file. There was nothing in this contract that required group grievances to be consolidated, which some contracts would have. So it would mean that sometimes if a grievance affected 25 people, we would file 25 grievances around it, and they would have to have 25 hearings about it. And so we would use that. We would, knock on their door. 5 people would be standing at the door, hand them 5 grievances. Next day, knock on the door, 5 different people standing there, handed them 5 different grievances, right? And just use the process kind of against itself. And that wasn't really about the grievance procedure. We didn't win those because of the strength of our arguments. We won those because we showed that a lot of members cared enough about this to do something about it. And it disrupted work, right? It ate up their time. It took time away from members for work. It just slowed things down a little bit. And so those kinds of opportunities to use the rights structures that we have, but use them not exactly in the way that they were intended when they were sitting down at the bargaining table and when management was envisioning what a grievance process would look like. On the first point too about getting people involved and talking about victories, I think another really important role of stewards here is being active communicators in the workplace. Right? That there's often an attitude of unionists that, like, if you care, you're going to come to the union meeting, right? Mm-hmm. Why does nobody come to the union meeting, right? That's where everything happens, right? But union meetings aren't always that interesting, for being honest, right? There's like a certain, some of them are great, but there's also a certain layer of people who go to them all the time. But Steward can take that back to the membership, right? There's this great Labor Notes article by a former Teamster organizer that I think about all the time. It's called "Bring the Union Meeting to the Members." This is a role that stewards can do, right? You can hold meetings at the workplace. If you have coworkers who come up to you after the union meetings and ask you what happened at the union meeting, that means that maybe they couldn't come, but they're interested enough to know, right? If you're responding, "Oh, well, you should just come," that's a missed opportunity, right? And so you can bring that to the workplace and to your coworkers. Builds respect, right? And it also brings people into the process of, this is what's happening at the union, even if you're not coming down to the union hall. And you can make sure that they're at an important meeting when one happens. But in the meantime, they don't have to come to every single one to be involved or active, care about the union.
I think that was huge.
That was a very good article, and it really, because of course we can all fall into that, because it can be frustrating when you are putting all this time and effort into something that's going to help these other people, right? And you're not doing it selfishly. It's not even necessarily going to help you. It's going to be helping these other people, and they don't even take the time to go to the damn meeting, right? That's really frustrating. But if we're really going to be in this, not selfishly, then asking what happened at the meeting is actually, like, better than the people who aren't going and aren't asking. That's one step closer to being a union activist. And people don't, it's tough, but that's definitely a better way to look at it. And it's accurate too. Asking about the meeting is one step closer to being an active union member than the people who don't go and don't ask. Right. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind.
You gotta meet people where they're at, and then you gotta think about, am I doing something that's going to bring them closer or push them farther away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was.
And the response of, "Well, you should just go to the damn meetings." It may feel good to you in the moment to try to tell someone off that way, but that's not bringing them closer to the union or closer to attending the meeting. Whereas I think being willing to report back every month, here's what we talked about. Whether it's you hold your own meeting or you just do a brief email to members and be like, "Hey, I was at the meeting this month. Here's what we did." You may be surprised at who that actually resonates with, because oftentimes, in those type of scenarios, the people that responded or the people that followed up were not the ones I expected. They were not necessarily the ones that the rep would normally associate as, okay, well, here's my next in line. They may throw you for a loop. But I thought Joe had some great comments there. And there was one thing I was going to sort of follow up on a little bit, in terms of follow the procedure, know that procedure in and out. What is the company or school district or factory, whatever the workplace, what is the grievance procedure? What is the policy? What does the contract say? You need to know that, and you never want to lose on technicalities. It kills your credibility, and it just sucks to lose on a technicality like a missed deadline, or you didn't fill out the appropriate form, or whatever it may be. You never want to do that. But to build on what Joe was describing, you have to be willing to be creative, though. So follow the procedure. Don't not follow the procedure, but be willing to kind of go outside the box and think about things that you can do in addition to, or things that you can do that's technically in compliance with the procedure, but maybe not what they expected. Going back to the example of the librarian group grievance that we had, just sitting here talking reminded me that not only did we do the multiple grievances, I, as a staffer, was assisting them. It wasn't my grievance. I couldn't sign my name to them. I wasn't a librarian. But what I could do, in addition to supporting them and making sure this happened, was I wrote my own letter from me as the staffer to the superintendent, to the board. And they got that the same day they got the group grievances. And then I also filed an open records request related to expenses in the budget about librarians, right? So they were getting hit from multiple angles. And, in no case could they argue that we didn't follow procedure or that we did something inappropriate. It was all on the up and up, but it was certainly unexpected. They didn't expect to be getting hit from all angles. And so that can also be, something to consider when you're exploring tactics. Are there things you can do in conjunction with the grievance, whether it's direct actions like marching on the boss, or more of the, legalistic type actions, filing records requests? Just, you got to think about how are you turning up the heat? Because the more you're turning up the heat, the more likely you are to get some sort of positive resolution, because they can see where things would escalate if they don't resolve it. But I think those are some great ideas.
Joe, I appreciate your time. Joe DeManuelle-Hall, staff writer and organizer at Labor Notes, talking about Stewards. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.